Hi there, everybody, and welcome to part 4 of the hashtag Critical Infrastructure series. This is our final part of the series, and we're finishing off with a bang. I am absolutely thrilled, delighted, honored, and privileged to be joined today by Logan Reddy. Logan Reddy is a life cycle planning and asset management professional, and it's an absolute privilege to have him here with the knowledge that no doubt you will get to hear a sneak peek about throughout this episode and throughout this chat. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to have Logan here in the room with us. Logan, good afternoon at the time of recording in South Africa. Good afternoon to you today. How are you doing?
I'm good, Tapatsula. Thank you. And good day to the listeners as well.
Awesome, Logan. It's fantastic to have you in the what I call the virtual room with us as part of the sort of hashtag Critical Infrastructure SA series, which is powered by Sebenzana, and it's absolutely thrilling to have you here with us in the room. Logan, we typically start off our episodes by getting to know the guest or the person in the hot seat a little bit better, and this is no different. I actually want to get to know you a little bit better. Although I probably do know all of this, but please do let the listeners know, in particular, where were you born, where did you grow up, and where did you attend university?
Oh, thanks, Tapatsula. So pretty much myself, born and raised in Durban. Lived there for most of my life, studied there. Over time, moved to Witbank, I think, based on the work experience, and currently now reside in Pretoria. So living in Durban, between areas like Asherville, those that know the area, Greenwood Park, Phoenix, that's where I finished my schooling. Then lucky enough to get a bursary to study with a utility ESCOM, where I worked, and completed my mechanical engineering degree. That was at the University of Durban Westville then. I think it's now incorporated into the University of KwaZulu-Natal, but pretty much attended the Westville campus.
Awesome. That's it's a lovely city, Durban, and with lovely weather as well. And I guess it gets a bit too hot in the summer times. It gets a bit too humid, but I think if you're used to it, it's probably not too bad. So
before moving out of Durban, you think it's the best city in the country. Then you get to. Oh, that's excellent.
Absolutely. So I want us to dive right into this. I want to talk about asset management, and you describe this as, and I quote, the superglue. I was so intrigued by that statement, right? So tell me a little bit about your view of asset management as the superglue, which is the thing that can fix everything. I'm quite interested to get your take on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think asset management's called a couple of things, and we'll get into the superglue issue. To me, depending who you speak to, some of the guys just said it's an accumulation of a lot of good practice, a lot of common sense stuff. So obviously to some, that's what it meant. To some, they get more involved. They say something like, you've got to have the right people with the right tools, doing the right thing at the right time. That sort of touches on it. But I think the aspect for me of the superglue is, organizations have been around for a long time. The concept of asset management maybe goes back to, depending who you speak to, the late 80s, early 90s. But it's probably linked together with a lot of management system type, so business improvement. And I think there's a strong aspect in asset management that touches on how you integrate the various functions. And I think that's actually gone on and expanded into other quality management. System was published. But to me, we always looked at it is how do you bring the various functions together with the asset performance, the asset delivery in really the center. And I think the whole idea of pulling everyone together, integrating it and aligning it was where the concept sort of sits through where you're sitting and talking of the superglue for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And I think it's such a wonderful analogy because Superglue, it just brings everything together, and it just it just sticks, and it's almost, you can sort of see the tangible benefits quite quickly. But it's also hard, I guess, to see the benefits if you sort of arrive and you just see everything together. You don't necessarily see the super glue because it's the stuff that's holding everything together. And so, on that note, why do you think it's important for us to pay attention to how we manage our assets? This might sound like a sort of obvious question, but it really is the crux of it. Is why do you think it is important for us to actually pay attention to how we manage our assets?
So the one concept I think that really goes, and they talk a lot when you go through maybe the detail, the context, the classical asset management speak. They talk a lot about what's the value you want to get out. And I think for a lot of us, the asset management is how do you drive that value. But for me, that's really about digging into the classical stuff, digging into the theory. If I almost want to put it in a very practical state, I always use something that maybe aligns with most of us. So I could think of something as simple as going down for that trip, and maybe we use Durban, so you touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
But imagine a family planning a trip. They want to go down to the coast, as an example. It could be anyway, so it's not specific. But there's an objective, there's a value attached to that. There's things like we want to get there safely, we want to get there on time, we want to make sure we're there comfortably. So there's a whole lot of intent you want to achieve, your objective you want to get on that. And I think where asset management comes in is how do you sort of align the super glue thing? How do you get everyone pulling together? How do you get everyone driving towards that objective as clearly as possible so you can maximize what you want to do? And I think if you want to unpack that further, that sort of starts setting up. Now, it's sort of difficult to relate that maybe back to an organization. But to me, there's an absolute synergy in that example of how do you want to achieve everything you want to, and how do you set yourself up within the context of asset management to do that, to achieve it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really sort of powerful take, around, aligning everybody to the actual common goal and common objective. So I really do love that take. So we started off a little bit fast. We sort of, dive right into asset management and critical infrastructure. But to sort of slow it down a little bit, and I want to get a sense from you. What's a typical day in your life nowadays? And I guess to juxtapose that, how does it sort of look different to a typical day, pre sort of pandemic?
Well, no, I think, lockdowns dominated a lot of what drives our schedules these days. So I'm still pretty much, I think one of the things, you get different type of people, some more productive in the morning, some more productive later in the day. I find myself sort of defaulting to the morning. So even with lockdown, most times before the sun's up, you want to get into the day. Sometimes not, but typically get into the day. So whether that's having the opportunity to get out, walk if we're not on our curfew, walk the dog, have a little. Maybe I still aspire to run, but it's somewhere between that too. But you want to get up. I think that really helps sort of get your mind around the day, sort of calm things down, focus. And I always enjoy a bit of quiet time in the morning. So typically being a family man, it's you've got the normal things. So getting the kids ready, with lockdown, dropping them off. But typically, if you're in the office, and if someone else is not picking it up, you have to do it. But the kids off. But typically, if I would normally be in the office, it's normally in there between 7:30 in the morning. Once again, allows you. And I think planning a day, getting yourself set up for the day is a big part of how I operate. Maybe it inevitably talks to things like asset management, if I bring it back to that, because I think a well-out plan allows you to assist your day. not a big one for disruptive. So maybe that's not always the positive part. Like to set up my day, drive it, plan up front, and I think that lends you to deliver, get through the day with minimal stress. But we live in the real world, so to me, I think even in that planning also allows you to deal with some of those unexpected things that come up. So that's it. That's pretty much my normal thing. As I said, days tend to be long these days. So I think what I find as well, you tend to be like most people. I think most people working from home tend to be 10, 12 hours in front of the laptop. So I think as possible, you try and get that balance, but that's not always easy.
Yes.
You try and fit in most of your other activities. Always try and leave a bit of time for really in the day, sort of reading in the evening, trying to pick up, what's happening in the environment. I think we've moved away from reading newspapers and that kind of thing. So you Google the news page, you pick up the headline. But that's always necessary before you close out the day to try and catch up, see what's there, and hopefully make sure you're not caught unawares.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people can relate to that sort of shift in the schedule as well as the shift in the way of working. What do you like to do for fun? I'm a bit curious. What are your sort of hobbies? Watching sport, things like that. What are the things that you typically like to do for fun?
We can't talk football now for that, but no, absolute armchair supporter for a lot of these. Past the days of running around on a field, but no, absolutely. In terms of getting out, getting physical, I think that's important. But watching a bit of Formula One, football, that's definitely. I think there's always the big events when they come along, athletics, Olympics, those type of things. So that's fun. So I think sports inherently entertaining. Competition, etc. Got an absolute passion for watching things got to do with sort of DIY. Maybe it's the things I can't do. But I love all this home improvement and car improvement kind of thing. So that's always that's entertaining. But yeah, I think just generally sports, Formula One, watching technology type things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. I can relate to the football debate. Yeah, it's not a great season for me to talk about my club. So the less we talk about it, the better.
We might have common.
We might have something in common there. Yes. So getting back to critical infrastructure and bringing this back home to South Africa. In terms of how we manage our critical infrastructure, how we should manage it differently in South Africa. Firstly, I'd like to ask you, what do you think are 3 things that we perhaps need to do differently in this space?
So Tapatswa, I'll talk to the 3 things, but I think for us, when you talk critical infrastructure, we've got to recognize that the capability of us as a community, as a country, as people in the environment. The one thing that hasn't been emphasized enough is how well geared we are. Not just to take care of the assets we've got and the built environment. So I want to start with the engineering aspect. A lot of professional engineers out there, and asset management is one of those areas now that's moving towards more professionalization. So being linked to Southern African Asset Management Association, I think there's a big link in terms of not just what EXA, the Engineering Council, can play in that role, but the related voluntary associations. And it's not just asset management we're talking, it's right across. It's the electrical disciplines, it's the mechanical, the civil. Asset management is focused on the maintenance and asset management part of it. But I think those all dovetail together to kind of talk to how we can support and how we should be contributing to that. So definitely, if I had to pick 3 things, definitely in the maintenance and the asset management space, I would, the first one really touch on is know your assets. Now, the slightly more prescriptive part says, whether you've got an asset register, whether you know the condition of your assets, whether you know when you're going to replace it, when you're meant to retire it. Those type of, just knowing your assets is a huge part. And I think that's something we haven't spent as much time. As a country, post 1994, maybe so what, we 26, 27 years. When you drive down the road, that road's been there for most of that period. But who's got it on their asset record? Who's making sure the maintenance takes place? Who knows what's the condition? We've had the heavy rains recently, and everyone's talking the potholes, etc. And that's all stuff about just knowing the asset in the first part and having a good feel of that. So knowing the asset is definitely one thing I would, expect that we can make a difference by starting to see it, and it runs from the top to the bottom. If I had to almost then pick another area that we could do that is, are your assets fit for purpose? Now, that's, when we start talking, the times have changed, people change. There's demands on the asset. For us, we can look in Gauteng, we're lucky, it's huge infrastructure here, that we've had upgrades to the highways, we've had the e-tolls come in, contentious for other reasons. But then with the lockdown, maybe even the transition in terms of traffic volumes, traffic moves, but understanding whether those assets are fit for purpose. I use something, just when we're talking roads, maybe it affects all of us. I always observe that, in Gauteng, it's not a high rainfall area. But growing up in Durban, and there was a lot of rain in that area, you always kind of observed and said, it's very hot, but we never saw as many potholes in the early days. But also the traffic weren't anywhere near. And how we design those roads for that, how we design the roads for the traffic volumes we expect, the amount of trucks on the road, those type of things. So I think it talks to that, but it talks across not just roads, a number of various asset areas. Checking whether the assets are fit for purpose is a huge part in terms of what to manage within that. Then if I maybe move on to something that touches on, it's one thing when you know it, it's one thing when you check whether it's fit for purpose. Asset decision making is something where I think for me, is the third part I had to pick on. I think how we think about the asset, neglecting to make decisions is really, I think, one area where it's not just we carry the neglect of possibly not having made the right decisions at the right time, but also starting to build new assets and do that, so that they continue to be fit for purpose, not just a discussion. So the decision is the third one I would talk about, is what are those decisions that need to be made? And how do you go about making those decisions, clearly, concisely, timelessly, so that we can maximize, if you talk critical infrastructure, but it goes across most asset industries.
And I absolutely love the way you sort of, I think thought about it and sort of stepped through that. Firstly, around, knowing your assets. And then, secondly, around, if you know them, are they actually fit for purpose? And then thirdly, the actual decision making that, bears the good outcomes as well as the bad outcomes as well. So absolutely, loved your take on that. And I think that's something to really ponder and let percolate a bit as well. If I bring it specifically to energy assets, I'm quite curious to sort of get your take around, how we balance asset management of existing assets with the need as well to sort of build renewable energy assets. How to sort of balance that, that sort of balancing act in our future, but also I think in our present at the moment as well.
No, definitely, it's energy assets. It's obviously close to the day job. I think a big part of it, and I want to take us back with that. Renewable energy is an absolute imperative going forward. It's a climate change, and you get the lot of various views. And it's difficult to say, one is outright, but fossil technology, fossil deriving, if I can say, the energy we need, electricity from fossil fuels, goes back to the Industrial Revolution. Nuclear's come along, wind technology, PV. And I think the nature of power systems now are also gearing up with other aspects of how we manage those assets to deal with this. But I think the need to go renewable is almost a no-brainer. We cannot keep burning the fossil fuels and continue to live on a planet that this is obviously adversely affecting. But so the imperative's there. But I think a lot more needs to be done. There's extremely clever people looking at what future power systems look at. I think they've looked at it, and we gearing up and we starting to do. Each residence, each business can be its own power producer. Embedded generation is something that's quite well known out there. But how the whole new system looks is why I touch on of saying, look at your assets, are they fit for purpose? Not just, we're saying we're moving from potentially fossil-based technologies to renewable technologies in an industry, I think but how do you move that? You can't just change overnight. There's aspects to that. And I think the whole aspect with asset management, it's not just also about the asset. It's not about just making it perform the best it can. It's about how to perform well based on the needs of everyone it serves, because assets exist not for themselves, but to serve an objective, to serve a value out there. So things like price to the consumer, what would the renewables bring that's different as well? And there's a whole lot of detailed aspects that will bring in. So I think for us, balancing that is about how do you transition? How do you continue to provide, arguably where we've come from with relatively cheap electricity, not so reliable now, but obviously there's different reasons for that. But to bring in renewables and transition the whole environment so you can continue serving that objective.
I think that's such an insightful take. And it is a balancing act, right? That we actually have to sort of take going forward, to sort of balance the existing that we have, but also suppose what you actually mentioned there is around innovation as well. There's also innovation that's possible in the existing assets, as well as innovation that's possible in building new assets and smarter assets as well. So I think that's a sort of really insightful take. And all of this, right? All of this that we're talking about, bringing it to how can actually managing our critical infrastructure and the sort of different assets across industry, what can it actually unlock for us in our economy, specifically in South Africa?
And first of all, I thought about it a bit and I had to read a bit because first question, and not to put you on the spot, but what do you think our critical infrastructure? What's that asset base in this country? If you count all the roads, all the hospitals, all the airports, train lines, train stations, ports, power stations, I couldn't do enough work, so I'm not going to try and come up with a number. But what's your take? The risk.
I mean, look, we're talking in the order of billions of dollars. I mean, we're billions of dollars, billions of rands. We're not talking small numbers here. We're talking. We're talking. I mean, we're just one major critical infrastructure node is billions of rands alone. If we look at sort of different nodes across the country, where sort of we have these critical infrastructure in abundance in one zone, that's billions of rands of value, as well as billions of rands of revenue generation. And, you can sort of cascade that down to community impact, employment opportunities, and so on. So we are talking absolutely massive, incomprehensible value in those assets, if you ask me. And some of that you can't measure, right? I mean, some of that you actually can't measure. You have the value, the intrinsic value of the asset, but then you have what I call the cascading value, which is, what it actually enables people to do with their lives and what actually the activities that it actually enables. And that value is immeasurable.
Absolutely. No, and that's an extremely good take. I put you on the spot.
On
So,
the spot,
so
yeah.
now I went back and I thought about it coming into this discussion. And the one thing that gave a context, so I don't know the value. I don't have that. And you're right, someone could put it down, but similar to most companies, you can put all your assets on an inventory and add it up. And whether it's replacement value or historic value, they could always debate it.
Yes.
But I picked up an article in Engineering News last year, September, and I think the Ministry for Public Works and Infrastructure spoke about how in the country, there's obviously, we keep on talking, how do we drive economic growth? How do we get the state-owned institution and the government, the country to perform better for that matter. And there was an aspect they touched on, and they said currently we're spending about 5.8%, that's the number they used, of our GDP towards the budget for that ministry, Public Works and Infrastructure. And, when you start saying 5.8% of the GDP, so you check a bit more, our GDP is running in the region of about 4 trillion.
Yeah.
So we're looking at in the region of about 240 billion rand. That's the annual budget to keep that ministry going, with the assets within their portfolio. And if we assume that is a maintenance budget, obviously there's salaries, etc. That's about maintaining. We'd have to look at what additional investment goes towards that. And the view in that article went on further to say by 2030, they want to see us spending about 10%. Not the 5.8%. So they're talking in today's terms about 400 billion rand. Now, when you talk about what do you see the role of asset management playing in that critical infrastructure, if we're spending that amount a year, and when we listen to the budget speech, maybe in the next week, they will start talking, and we give our ear to say, what are you talking from critical infrastructure? And for us to say, with that amount of money being spent, surely we want control. Yes. So I'll go back. We want to know, what are we spending it on? Are those assets just chewing up money, or are they going to be fit for purpose in terms of what we want to do as a country? And then what decisions do we have to make right across them? And I think, that's where, for me, without answering it, if we don't have a view of where we're spending the money on the assets, if we don't even know what assets we have and how they're going to support us, then we really at an infant stage of asset management. And I think it's important that, maybe in the SONA address, it was how the president touched on, and he said professionals need to be running our local governments, local municipalities and stuff. That's an aspect of starting. To me, that was a door of saying we need people to come in and start managing these assets better. If it hasn't been done already, and I think all indication is it can be better, that we need to find a way. And that, for me, hopefully answers your question of saying what role can asset management play in terms of that.
Yeah. It more than does. I think it absolutely, gives what it was like a macro take on it. It really sort of puts the big picture of what asset management can do and what it can unlock for us, in our economy in South Africa. And Logan, as we come to a close, I just want to thank you so much for sharing with us your knowledge, your insights. I think it was an incredibly knowledge-bearing chat. If that's a phrase, that's allowed to be used. But I've gained, an incredible amount of knowledge listening to you, both in this episode, but also, in our discussions before it. And, I think anybody who's listened to this can count themselves, really privileged to have been in the same virtual room as you, listening to your take on these things. And I think we're certainly really thankful and grateful. And I am really thankful and grateful that you have come onto the show as part of the, Critical Infrastructure SA series. And very thankful that you've been a part of that. And I'm absolutely thrilled that we ended it off with a bang. So thank you very much. And I hope that you've enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely. I've really enjoyed the engagement. I think what you're doing is amazing. And I think, as far as possible, I hope more people support you and you keep doing that. But it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be invited. And I'm glad I could share. But yeah, I'm not as much an expert. I think I've as much got an opinion. I would definitely consider myself a professional, but I'm
Yeah.
glad to share. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Logan. And to you, as the listener who's listening to this, I want to thank you for supporting Impactful Conversations, for subscribing to the platform, for engaging with us. Really, really appreciate your comments, your feedback, your questions for us. Thank you so much for continuing to do that. And we look forward to having you back again on our next episode as well. So, from Logan and myself, thank you very much. Stay healthy, stay safe, keep washing your hands, and until we meet again, goodbye.